We want our lessons to be dynamic, immersive and memorable, but the pressure to tick off vocabulary lists and synthetic structures can leave us and our learners feeling, well, frustrated. So how can we step away from set materials to foster learning that everyone looks forward to? Well, that is exactly what we're talking about today. Hi there, and welcome to TESOL Pop, the podcast where we share insights into the latest conversations and practices in teaching English. I'm your host, Laura Wilkes, and joining us to share her expertise today is Fiona Hunter. Fiona is the founder of Kids Club English and a specialist in ELT for preschool and primary. You've probably already seen her joyful teaching demo videos where she shares her love for craft, puppetry, songs and storytelling. If you haven't, I've included some wonderful examples in the description for you to check out. In this episode, Fiona talks about the pressures we face when working with set materials, how moving away from these starts with our teaching beliefs, and how we can approach lessons with a starter, main course and dessert mindset. So let's join the conversation where Fiona starts by outlining the challenges that we face.
I think there's a few things, but one of the first things that teachers talk about is engagement. I think it's a lot of hard work to engage young learners when you're using course books, because they often have to work very hard to bring the materials to life, adding in movement, more interaction, more fun on top of something that's, it's quite sort of static and for reasons, for good reasons where they've had to sort of save space. But as a teacher, you're having to think quite hard to what do you do with that? Especially with the youngest ones as well. You might only be faced with a, page of pictures and how do you bring that to life? And I think the thing nowadays as well, especially, is that a lot of mainstream schools use course books. So if the children are going to your class and it's an extracurricular activity, or, it's an academy, then they're getting more of the same. So they're less likely to be engaged if you're using a course book, so they're looking for something different. And I think that's one thing. But I think another area of pressure that teachers often feel is to cover all these language points, because course books, the vast majority, still follow this kind of synthetic syllabus where you've got, your vocabulary and your grammar, and you've got to kind of check these things off. And teachers often feel I've got to get through this grammar and vocabulary within their school year or term, whatever time frame they're working towards. And that can often mean that, sort of the more engaging looking things, whether it's a projects or stories or CLIL, they get kind of rushed or sort of sidelined. So I think teachers, if they're working with course books, feel quite a lot of pressure to kind of just get sort of stuck to to the language, rather than sort of creating these experiences in the classroom and the more enjoyable things for both the teacher and for the children. So there can be quite a lot of frustration as well, I would say, with, where because of this sort of synthetic syllabus layout with language like that they might have done a progress test or something, and then they revisit that language down the line later and the kids don't remember it. And it's it feels frustrating. So I think there's that sort of sense that teachers often feel quite innately that something's not working or something's not quite right here. Because essentially I think a lot of course book material with the best intentions aren't very aligned with second language acquisition theory, and how children actually learn. So I think that, I don't want to bore your listeners with all the second language acquisition theory, but essentially language is acquired through doing and through more implicitly, and it's not this sort of ticking off language items in order and learning in this linear way. Has been shown that that's not how it works.
The idea of creating an environment that's more engaging, fostering implicit learning and meaningful interactions with the language that learners really look forward to, and it is different from other ways in which subjects are taught. Sounds brilliant, but it can be really scary to let go of that course book. I guess because we may have ideas of what a non-course book or lesson may look like, or what it could risk becoming, like without materials and set plans and stuff. So I think perhaps a really good place for us to move on to is to kind of give a window into what can a lesson look like when we're not holding on to that course book and not following set synthetic materials as you described.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind, rather than like going straight to the lesson, I think we kind of need to zoom out a little bit first, because it does require, if you are going to make this decision to step away from a course book, it does mean that you kind of have to accept, that you believe that children learn in a different way, and that they don't learn through ticking off language items on a list, and I think you need to accept that, and that's a difficult thing to accept. It is, like when we're trained, most of us I think are trained, and we're with course books and approaching language teaching in that way. I think it is quite difficult, because exactly. What are your objectives then? Like, what is it that you're teaching? We're language teachers, right? So I need to teach English, but what does that look like?
I think you're absolutely right with the mindset. It's a huge mindset shift, and it could potentially be challenging what we were trained on as well. So it's like a rethinking of our whole teaching philosophy.
Yeah, I think there are ways that I've approached, because I can tell you, I've struggled with the same things. And when I moved away from coursebooks to begin with, I probably looked at an in the middle approach. So I think you can go, and I have done, and I do with some of my children. You can go completely off-piste. It's kind of a hard TBL approach and task-based learning. With one group, I use projects or inquiries, and the children are kind of creating the syllabus jointly with me, negotiating. Now that type of thing, and it's fantastic. It really is. Where we've made things like Kamishibai theatre. They've invented stories. They've learned how to use stop motion video. They've created videos presenting their perfect house where they've built like a project, and they've learned math skills. Yes, all of that, and it's like, oh wow, that sounds good, but where do you start with that? That's a very different approach to kind of language learning. What happens with that is we're doing a lot of projects, and we're doing things through language, with language, but it's emerging from out of the interaction. It's emerging through the doing, and the skill of the teacher there is really noticing the gaps in what the children are, what they're needing to be able to communicate and perform those tasks through English. And you're feeding it in, and you're also trying to kind of harvest some of the useful things that come out of that, and thinking, how do you feed that back in again? That's really great, but I think that's quite hard to go from like working with a course book to, okay, we'll just go free then and we'll see what happens, So, and that's not what I did. I didn't go from course books to using these more project-based stuff. I took stories as a starting point. And this is how I like to think about it now, is that you've got different starting points for working without a course book. And one of them can be semi-structured. So, and I think stories are a really nice way into that. So if you're creating a course with picture books, you can take a picture book and you can look at that and analyze that picture book and think, okay, do you know what? I can use these language points, and that vocabulary set, and I can focus explicitly on that stuff, just as you would with a course book. But they're also going to get this kind of immersive experience. They're going to get a lot of language that's used implicitly. They're going to get language which is much richer than what they would experience in a course book, which can be quite limiting. So you as a teacher, as a kind of first stepping stone, you can feel like you're giving them a richer, more engaging experience, but you're still you're still got your stabilizers on with your explicit language focus. And then it's up to you really how much you want to, step away from that even, whether you need to or whether you find it useful. What is really valuable and what I've sort of seen through my experience is that if you teach in this way, you start to be able to react more to what the children are saying and work more with the children in front of you rather than the course book and that material taking up, the central position. And you start to notice that and you start to get freer yourself. If we took an example of a story-based lesson, it wouldn't look so vastly different from a course book lesson in that you've probably got an opening routine, you've probably got your main tasks and activities, and you've probably got something to finish at the end, some closing routine. A story lesson could include, I like to think about it as like stages rather than fixed routines, but starters, your main course and your dessert, So I'll think about a unit around a picture book, and basically I'll think about what's going to be my outcome at the end of that. And it could be them retelling the story, it could be them acting out the story, it could be them using puppets, it could be them creating something or a video to share with the parents.
What I love about role plays as well is when you bring props or the dressing up box, like how surprisingly the quieter students all of a sudden take on a whole other identity as well. I know you have lots of resources available to support people on this path who are wanting to explore and experiment. Can I ask, where would be a good place for listeners to go to find those resources and get some inspiration on how they can start?
Well, I've got on my website now, there's in the teaching tips section, there's a quick start guide. So this is something I've put together, which kind of walks you through some different starting points and a process that you could go through to kind of put together a unit. I think I've called it a flexible unit, so without course books. And there's also a short 4-part video series, which I think in total is less than 10 minutes. And both of those are accessible on the Kids Club English website.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I love the fact that you do bite-sized resources as well. Like, as Teaser Pop listeners love bite-sized stuff, I think that's absolutely perfect place for them to start. So as always, folks, I'm going to include those links to the Kids Club website that Fiona mentioned there, so you can access those easily and give it a go and let us know how you get on. Fiona, it's been lovely talking to you today. Thanks so much for sharing a window into this world and just encouraging us to just step away from maybe the comfort zone a bit more, to experiment with a more creative approach to teaching.
Thank you so much for having me.